welcome. We've got some chat to do. No, seriously though, welcome to Football Chat again. Unofficially, the best radio show to come out of Durham. Well, and I officially mean the fifth best most listened to briefly in 2013. It kind of takes away the spark that though, doesn't it? Joining me as ever, Robbie Keane personified, it's Gavin Rice. Gav, it terrifies me that's a dated reference. How old are we?
We're definitely getting too old for this.
Yet, here we are again. So both you and I are getting pretty excited as we've developed a niche here, and that's why you'll see the word impact in the title up there. Gav, what's impact? What were we thinking when we came up with the idea?
Well, essentially, Tim, we've been discussing this for, I think, a long time, that whenever we did Football Chat previously, it was always on current events and what was happening in the newspapers and trying to keep things light and current. Now that we've had a bit of a longer period without football, I think it's given us a bit of time to reflect on the impact that football has on us, on society, both positively and negatively, I guess. And I think that it's a lot more interesting to us anyway. We'll see if anyone else finds it interesting, but we find it a lot more interesting to try and sort of get into some of the tougher, more difficult aspects of that impact and really discuss them and debate them. And yeah, that's why I was very excited to get involved.
Yeah. So broadly, exactly that. We were triggered by thinking about football, specifically mental health. We love it, as you said. We've missed it. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, though, I think, as you know. And what impacts and costs does that have on us and we on us? So our plan is that we're going to release these every week. And we're going to get a guest in to chat that through with us. Exactly, Gav, as you said, talking on those bigger issues. And I think broadly we want some time to reflect on football, how best to follow it in a way that keeps the good bits and recognises the more tough and gritty stuff. So on that, joining us today is an old friend of mine. He's actually a player manager. So read Glenn Hoddle, Attilio Lombardo, Kevin Nolan, the greats. It's Elliot Gathercole. Els, how you doing, mate?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks very much for having me on today.
Nice. So you and Gav, you met literally about 10 minutes ago, didn't you?
We did.
But you obviously know his tones very well from being this is a real rags to riches story, isn't it? It's a fan of the show from you being brought into the fold.
I was there at the start of Football Chat back in, 2013?
2013, yeah. January 2013.
An example of the impact that the show had on Elliot is that
exactly.
He's been dying to get back and get involved.
And right from that first episode where, Eden Hazard sat on a ball boy, and here we are now in the middle of a pandemic. Still chatting about Eden Hazard. Obviously, I've changed my opinion on him in general. How are you doing, Gabba? As I never actually asked you, which is kind of at odds with what we're talking about. So I thought I'd come back and ask you how you're doing.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I think that lockdown has been good to me. I've probably been good to take a step away from football, do a bit more actual physical exercise, get in good shape. But yeah, absolutely delighted that football came back this week, because there was a hole in my life that I didn't realise was there until I had the joys and the despairs of watching Tottenham Man United last night.
Yeah, it was. It's interesting. I think I go through, and I think we'll come on to talk about this maybe in later episodes as well in general, but I think with football being back, I was really torn because I think when we were building up to it, I was like, this all looks great, like I'm ready for this, like it looks like it's come at a good time, they're being really clear. If you watch the Sky build up to Sheffield United Villa, they were very clear about the real seriousness they were going in. And then I watched it and I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in how they were in terms of they're all hugging. There's lots of contact in that front, and I'm sitting there going, I don't know if this is 100% foolproof, if that makes sense. But as you say, it's that weird balance between you wanting football to be back so much, because I was delighted when it came back, and just feeling a tinge of I don't know sadness with it, I guess.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that there is an artificial element to it that I think that this first week of games, people would just be excited to watch any sort of football. That's fine. They're getting back used to it. I think if there was to be any form of second spike or in the virus, or if there was to be any sort of further issues there, or I don't know, budgets being cut or support being cut to the NHS, then I think that football would have to take a long, hard look at itself and wonder, wait, did we just start back again because our pockets were empty, or was this actually a decision that was made for the broader good?
Yeah. Elsa, how have you been with football coming back this week?
I mean, I was really excited for it, and then 10 minutes into the Villa-Sheffield United game, I think I realised that not all football was born equal. But it's good to have it back. I've enjoyed being able to catch up with a few games. The City-Arsenal game particularly, I enjoyed that. It's definitely weird having it back and sort of toying around with having the fan noises on or not. I had them on for about 5 minutes, and then after a sort of goal attempt, it all felt very fake, and so I actually, for most of it, I've had them off. Yeah.
I'd say 10 minutes into the Villa-Sheffield United game, I realised why I would never have watched Villa-Sheffield United in a normal season.
There it is. There's a regular new listeners to the show. There's a regular go between me and Gav on the lower league versus high league quality. Although I will admit, in this instance, it was a dud game.
And the fact that Sheffield. Yeah, I'd say the fact that Sheffield United are above Tottenham at this minute means that I don't have too much to shout about in terms of being a lower league game. But there's still an element of maybe I just like to watch the big games.
Oh, nice. Cool. So what I'll do is I'll give a rundown in general. So what we're going to do today. So every week we'll take a topic. Today we're going to look at talking up in general. So Elliot, there is not only are you a very knowledgeable football fan, you're a Palace fan. You've got your shirt on there, as we can see very, very proudly. But also you've got some experience in this field. It's part of the reason why we've asked you on for this in particular. Have you got 30 seconds to give us a quick rundown of credentials, for want of a better word?
Yeah. So at university, I volunteered with charity Nightline. So I was at London Nightline, which is essentially a student Samaritan service. Most universities have them nowadays. And then I ran the service for 2 years. And since then, I've moved to London University. I'm a student wellbeing advisor there, sort of working with students on everything from mental health, but also finances, relationships, everything else that sort of comes with university life.
Awesome. And we'll come on to that in a minute. What we're going to do now is we're going to do a feature called Change My Mind. So what we've done is we were watching the football this week and we were looking for players who potentially might change our mind. And then what we thought is we would get our guest. So Elliot has sent us a list of players that he's not convinced by. The idea on this is that it would be very easy, I think, for us to come on this show and go, David Luiz was rubbish on Wednesday night. Like, he was at fault for that goal, he was at fault for that goal. But actually, I think we were quite keen to look at it in the way of being like, actually, that feels quite overdone. That feels quite lazy. That feels quite. David Luiz knows he's not had a good game. Like we don't need to rub that in general as football fans. And David Luiz is obviously is a good footballer. Interestingly, Gav, I'm going to come to you now because one of the players that you're going to now try and pitch to change Elliot's mind is David Luiz. So I will let you make your pitch.
No problem. Well, yeah, essentially, I wanted to pick David Luiz on the basis that he had an awful week, and I have personally myself also criticised him hugely, probably on the football chat as well. So wanted to almost change my own mind. So essentially, looked at David Luiz's career. David Luiz started out, if you listen to an interview that was actually on The Athletic with his first manager at Vitória in Brazil, he explained that David Luiz is not a true centre-back. He is a third centre-back in a back three, one that brings the ball out from the back and has a skill set that actually is suited better for defensive midfield or a very specialty third centre-back. He did that so well there that he came across to Benfica. He played as a two, but usually with quite a physical, dominating centre back. And it's been a pattern throughout his career that if you partner him with a John Terry or with a Thiago Silva, David, essentially he can be one of the best second defenders or third centre backs. And I tried to think about this. I was like, is there any parallels in the game for where you've got a specialty player and actually he just gets played there because of his skill set? But for example, if you took Lionel Messi is probably the best passer in European footballer, has the best vision in European football, and has one of the best first touches in European football. You could play him as a fantastic centre midfielder. You could partner him with a very physical centre midfielder next to him so it wouldn't get noticed if people ran around him. But in reality, Messi is much more effective in a front three because of his skill set. That's how you get the best out of him. David Luiz has been guilty of actually having such a good, well-rounded game that he's been played at centre back, but he is very much a specialty player, and his awards that he's won throughout his career, including Champions League, Europa League, Premier Leagues, the French League, the Portuguese League, speak to the fact that he's probably one of the best third centre-back players that have probably been in European football in the last 20 years.
There's some good arguments there.
That's good. I think I can beat it, though. So you talk about David Luiz as being a player who is constrained by the modern game and the fact that he doesn't quite fit in what we want him to do. I think there's not a player that defines that more than Jesse Lingard. So Jesse Lingard, names you gave me, Elliot. What I would say about Jesse is that I just want to take you back to an interview a couple of years ago that Rio Ferdinand did before the World Cup. And he said Jesse is one of the best players on the half turn that we've got in general. I would stick to that. I think Lingard on the ball is cracking. I think he's able to play in those gaps. I think he doesn't quite fit in with what we want of him. I think that there's potentially a bit of branding of Jesse Lingard, which means it's easy to criticise him, which we will come on and chat to later. But in general, like as in a following episode, but I think Jesse is someone who the media like to have a pop at because he's a bit confident. He's potentially seen as a bit arrogant at times. Whether that's true, I'm not so sure. What I would say about Lingard is that he's clearly got the trust of some very good managers. I will never question Gareth Southgate, as you know. And Jesse clearly is a big fan of Lingard. He scores big goals. That's the other thing I'd say. He scores big goals. He scored the FA Cup final winner. He scored the goal against Croatia in the Nations League, which levelled it up. I can see Gav will already be questioning the validity of the Nations League when it comes back in general. We could
do an episode on that.
He scored against Panama. I honestly think that Jesse is, and I'm not just pitching this, we've deliberately picked players that we're not just pitching it because we're just trying to have fun with this. I honestly think Jesse Lingard is a much better player than he's given credit for. And the other thing I'd say is the ability to break through at Manchester United when he's now 20, he's 27 years old, which is often branded at him as a criticism. He broke into the Manchester United team in 2013. So he was 20 when he broke in, which actually, if you've got to the age of 20, in fact, sorry, it was later than that. It was 2015, 16, so he was 22. So if you break into a team at 22, you've got to have a bit about you in terms of mental strength to be able to come back from loan deals and then say, do you know what? I'm taking this place back. So see Harry Kane, see Jesse Lingard. So there's my case. What are you thinking of?
I'm a bit torn because I think you both make some good arguments, but I guess what I can't quite believe is that I'm actually going to have to back Gav with David Luiz there. I think the idea that David Luiz is actually a specialty player and that we have them all over the pitch. Like you might take someone like Mesut Ozil, for example, and say that he needs or a luxury player and he needs to be played in the right position. But actually, when you play him in that position, you get more out of him than you would out of many players. The idea that actually David Luiz is that player, I think that's a very strong argument. I think the problem I have with Jesse Lingard is that at the moment he's not delivering a lot of goals or assists. I don't think he got a single one in 2019, like the whole of the year. And yeah, he does score some big goals, although a big goal against Panama is questionable. But I think I'm going to have to go with Gav and David Luiz there.
Well, I'm delighted that I was able to, at least I'm better than Tim. I'm not better than any of our guests at winning these sort of competitions, unfortunately, but it's one thing.
I can only think I've been penalised by the fact that your views were more grounded. No, it isn't good. I do genuinely think that about David Luiz. I do think that he's clearly a good player. Like I think like Jamie Carragher came out and absolutely slaughtered him on Wednesday, wasn't it? After the game,
yeah.
And it was like,
yeah, I wouldn't take him in a back two at Tottenham, and I can see why he still struggles at Arsenal. But it was interesting to see. I didn't realise how many trophies he won. Went on Wikipedia. You'd think he's one of the best players the world's ever seen. Looking at his Wikipedia.
yeah.
But that's the thing about David Luiz, isn't it? He was brought to Arsenal to sort of bring. Yeah, he was meant to sort of bring the ball out of defence, but he was brought to Arsenal to be the defender, to bring a bit of stability. And he's never been the guy that's going to bring the stability, but he works alongside. Like you could imagine him playing alongside, like obviously John Terry worked well. Someone like Vincent Kompany, like he would have thrived next to someone sort of who offered that stability.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if he. I mean, because it's interesting. You think of players folding back into their position the older they get. So you think of David Luiz as naturally he'll develop into this older statesman in the back line. He'll be someone more solid and dependable. I almost think if maybe moving into defensive midfield would be a good role for him in general, because his big strength at centre half was his ability on the ball and his pace.
Mm-hmm.
Big things, and as they start to wane, as they naturally will, where they're actually moving him into that kind of defensive midfield Fernandinho role. I know that's there is question marks over David Luiz's concentration, but yeah, he's clearly got a mass amount of ability in general, and yeah, cool, fine, Gaff, you one up in that respect.
Well, I look forward to going to up next week, but we'll move on with the.
Okay, we'll see what comes out of that. Right, so we'll come on to our main section in general. What we want to chat about this week, as I said, is about talking up. So it's about the idea that I think there's been a shift recently, which you guys feel free to disagree on, and we're just kind of having this as a conversation in general. So we're not fitting agenda here. We're just trying to talk in general about how we see things at the minute. I think there's been a shift over the last 2-3 years in terms of how we're told to speak up and to talk about our mental health and to talk about how we're concerned about things. What I then found really interesting when we were planning for this and looking at it was 2 players in particular. It was Troy Deeney and it was Danny Rose. So Danny Rose, for those of you who might not be aware, spoke up before the 2018 World Cup about struggling with mental health issues and really struggling with depression and that affecting him at Tottenham Hotspur. Was at the time, the sense was the media widely praised him, but actually what he said since is that actually clubs have vetted him to check that he wasn't a nutter, I think was the phrase he used in general. Troy Deeney's come out recently before the season started and said he wasn't playing because of the risk of coronavirus to his young child, and has then received horrible, horrible threats in general. And what struck me was Deeney comes out and says, it's all very well and good us being told to speak out. But actually, when we do speak out, we get absolutely hammered for it in general. So the questions which, and I'll come to Elliot first to speak about this, I've got was kind of, as fans, what responsibility do we have to those players in general? Because I think there's a view, or there has been a view banded around when I've had conversations with people that these guys are millionaires who are paid, and actually I have a right to give an opinion on them basically at whatever cost. And secondly, also, what messages that tells us. So obviously we, as guys in our 20s, I think it's fair to say that most of us at one point or another will go through some form of mental health. Mental health is not a stigma word. It's not a you've got mental health. It's that at some point you it is likely that most of us, I don't think that's a controversial statement to say it's likely that most of us at some point will have a dip in our mood. But what impact then things like how we see Troy Deeney and Danny Rose treated has on us? So, Elliot, I'll come to you for your first thoughts first, and then Gav, feel free to chuck in off the back of that.
Yeah, so I think, I guess the first thing to say is I don't deny the sort of the paying fans' right to be critical of players. I'm as guilty as any football fan of criticising performances. I know even before today, I was chatting to Tim, ironically, about David Luiz and his poor performance on Wednesday. So I think that is a part of football, and sort of choosing as a manager, choosing who's going to play. And as fans, that's something that we engage in. But I think the way that we engage in that is really important. And I think that sometimes fans can assume that because the players are getting the big money, that they've got this shield or protection against damaging comments. And I guess with the prevalence of social media as well, that's definitely not the case, because instead of just sort of chanting in the stadium, there's now this direct route to players. And I remember when I first sort of discovered it, like I remember tweeting Damien Delaney of all people, and getting a response back to him and sort of thinking, oh, this is really cool that I can sort of be in direct contact with a current Palace player. But I think that people forget that there's a real player behind that Twitter account, and I think that's where the boundaries are blurred, because players are using those Twitter accounts to connect with fans, and it's very, very easy to slate someone on social media, and it's very easy to tag them in it, and you don't even necessarily have to put a name to your comment. You could be an anonymous profile. And I think that we do have a responsibility to be careful about our criticism, I guess. It's all right to sort of talk about players sort of not performing to their best and that kind of thing. But when the attacks become more personal, and when they become targeted, and I know that particular players can be targeted for a variety of reasons, I think that's when we need to be more considerate about the opinions that we're holding and how we're aiming them at those players, because a string of footballers have sort of recently come out and talked about this. I know you mentioned Danny Rose. It was a few seasons back that I think Aaron Lennon came out and said that he'd been struggling with his mental health as well. And I guess if we do want these players to be coming out and talking to us about the fact that they do have sort of like mental health problems, like any of us could do, then we need to be respectful when they do, and we need to be making sure that we're not contributing in a negative way, even when their mental health is in a good place.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting sort of angles on it, in that it's hard to disassociate the amount of money that's been pumped into football and how commercial it's been made, that each of us knows supporting a football club, you will spend a lot of money, and it has now become about a product. And if there is a part of that product which you don't think is performing well, or you don't like, then we have a culture where you can immediately respond on that, and you can be quite negative and quite quick, and that's social media. But there is the amount of money in football. We wouldn't get angry at a co-worker who had to take time out for mental health, or a Troy Deeney situation where they had a child at home who had respiratory issues, so they couldn't come into the office at the minute. I think we feel like we almost own the players, and forget that there are human beings behind that.
Gav, I think you're right, that I think that the way the game is that we believe we've got this right for things to be our way and for things to be the way we want. Granit Xhaka comes to mind as well. If you remember at the start, it feels like years ago, but at the start of this season, he walks off the pitch. He's got 60,000 fans on his back. like slaughtering him. And yet, the minute he turns back and reacts, I'm not. Well, no, actually, I'm just saying I understand it. I get how you're walking off a pitch. Like, why on earth are you supposed to just keep your cool when those around you are allowed to do what they want? Like,
I think that often football fans define the players by their salary and by the idea that being a footballer is sort of like as kids. I'm sure both of you at different points sort of wondered what it would be like to be a footballer, and it's something we've all aspired to, or lots of us have, and so by that standard, I think fans sort of feel they have a right to criticise, because this is a person who is living their dream. And so if they're earning £100,000 a week and they're not performing, then of course I have this right to say whatever I like about them, because they've still got their money and they don't have to do a 9-to-5 job and that kind of thing. And I think that's defining a player by their job is when things become not so good, because actually before being a footballer, they're a person, and they are susceptible to mental health issues in the same way that any of us are.
And I guess it's like, from my perspective again, it's this removing the fact that there's a person at the end of it almost is what is at the core of the issue. But it's both. I think the way that it could change is if fans take responsibility for what they're saying, and they wouldn't say it in person, or they wouldn't say one-on-one to a person and you attach your name to it. But I do think that there is an underlying issue with the money in the game, that football clubs, they've got balance sheets where each of those players has a number against their head as an asset. They know how much a Harry Kane brings in from a sponsorship perspective, that they can essentially rent out this human being to be on TV and hold a Mars bar. And they will get some cash for that. And from the club's perspective, if you've got an asset which, first, if they don't want people to speak out from their perspective, someone like a Danny Rose raising a lot of issues which might scupper a sponsorship deal, they want Danny Rose to stick to playing football because that's what brings the money in. So I do think that the amount of money in the game means that clubs will have to almost have this negative view of each player being different where they are on the mental health spectrum, because they have to treat them like assets. But I do think us as fans, we should take a step back and stop looking at how much a player makes, like you said, and how much X and Y, that we shouldn't feel such an attachment to the commercial side of it, and should just like the players for the game at the end of the day.
I think I'm interested in what you said there, Gav, because I find that mental. I find it like, as in, I don't, because I know that so much of our society is built around assets, financial management, all that sort of things. I know that. I don't find it mental on that level, like, as in, I can understand that is the position. I just find it mental that we've got here. We've got to a position where players are basically, and we'll come on to talking about this next week, in terms of, we're talking about Tyrone Mings next week and what he said in terms of actually players being seen as commodities. But actually this idea that a player is basically owned. Like, it's basically, you do what we want you to do. And I find it sad we've got there. Like, I find it sad that there's such a conflicting message. And my question on it is if we work on the assumption, I know from speaking to you, we've worked on the assumption that what's happened to Danny Rose is not good. It's not kind. It's made him feel small from when we've spoken about it, when we've done stuff. I'm going to use the analogy from Black Lives Matter in general, because obviously there's a lot of talk at the minute about people coming out and saying it's not enough just not to be racist. It's actually that you've got to be anti-racist as well. And what I come to in that respect is, in terms of players as fans, in terms of actually the impact that we're having, the impact that we're having on our society as a whole, is it enough to just sit here when Danny Rose comes out and goes, well done, Danny, you've done all right there, and then just leave it? Or actually, do we need to be advocating for something different more as fans? Do we need to be, and I'm not looking at it in a naive way, because I think the argument that will come back from some people is never going to change. It's bigger than me, but I just don't think we can take that tact anymore. So my question then is, what do you think we can go further with that? How do we do that?
I think we need to be advocating for sort of like the Premier League and the Football League to be doing more. I know that there's places like the PFA who offer support, but I think that there's a responsibility for the clubs and for the leagues and actually that's where a lot of the broadcasting money is going and that kind of thing, to be making sure that they're sort of offering that appropriate support and actually encouraging that support to be proactive. So as a fan, I can applaud Danny Rose for standing up and saying I've had these difficulties, and I think that it was really brave of him to talk about it. But I do think that the sort of commercial organisations behind it can and probably should be doing more.
Yeah, I think that there could definitely be campaigns that show from each and every football club that, as you said at the very start of this piece, I guess, is that each and every player will be on a mental health spectrum, and that actually these are human beings that are dealing with, they've got family issues, they could be supporting a lot of different people in their lives, almost making them human for the people that are watching it, because I think that it would be very hard for fans to be so negative and hurtful and attack people online if you actually knew, oh well, he's got a newborn baby who's having issues with respiratory. I think that there's more that can be done. It's not going to fix every single person, and social media might be a topic that we go into in more detail at another point, because that is that's heavily linked to this. But at the end of the day, mental health, as you said, everyone is on that spectrum. These guys are being told that you're the luckiest people in the world. You've got absolutely everything. You're also the worst player in the world. You're doing your job horrendously. I'm allowed to shout at you in the street. And it's a real mixed message that I think that so many more footballers who don't come out and talk about mental health must struggle with mental health.
I guess football really is a game of the highs and the lows, isn't it? Like one week you can have sort of had a really good performance, and the next week you've given away a penalty and being absolutely slated. Like this time last year, you wouldn't have guessed that. Like just looking at like some of the comments that Roy Keane was making about Harry Maguire after last night's performance, telling him that he should be getting a taxi back to the club, back to the club, because it was such a poor performance, and David De Gea should have been fined at half time. And it's just the real highs and lows. Both of those players over the past couple of seasons have sort of, for the clubs they've played for, they've had highs and lows, but they've been pretty well respected. And so to see such aggressive comments come out, I think the highs and lows of it is a symptom of the issue.
Yeah, and I do think that there's an underlayer, especially in English football, of these sort of hard men footballers, and you don't talk about issues, and you just like hard hitting, hard tackling. Roy Keane thinking, oh yeah, just shut up, get on with it, do this, do that. Roy Keane had plenty of bad games in his career. He made plenty of mistakes, like walking away from the Republic of Ireland pre-World Cup, and a bit of a huff about the training facilities strikes me straight off the bat. And that, if he was willing to just understand that, yes, some players are making mistakes at some point, I think that he then, and we all joke about it, and it is quite funny, it's quite entertaining for a pundit to have those sort of views, but it does set off just that. This is what a lot of people will then repeat and talk like, and they will be sharing those views on Twitter, and it's extremely divisive.
Yeah, and Sky Sports will, I'm guessing already, have a video up saying Roy Keane heated opinion, like that kind of thing, or Roy Keane slates David De Gea.
And what does Harry Maguire feel like whenever he sees that all of his friends are sharing it, his family seeing it, and he's the captain of Manchester United, and a Manchester United legend has been saying that he shouldn't be playing for the club and that he needs to get a taxi home. I do think that, yeah, it's another broader point, but it's very odd that we as a society almost encourage those sorts of really polarized opinions like Roy Keane, and we try and make it as harsh and critical as possible.
And such a long way from where we were when Harry Maguire first signed for United. And at that point, he was an £80 million signing, but he was going to fix the United defence, and he had the potential to become like a sort of long-standing captain and that kind of thing. And it just all changes so quickly.
Let's be honest, he has as well. Harry Maguire's been brilliant. Harry Maguire, I think most people would say he's even on the cusp of potential team of the year, if you think about it in that perspective, in terms of actually the impact he's had on Manchester United as a defence. Gav, coming back to your point about Roy Keane, I find it really interesting because I think we can sit here and say we've come a long way, like we've come so far in terms of how it is. I don't actually necessarily think that's helpful. Because I think that alienates a number of people from the conversation. I think we as 20 and 30-year-olds say to a bunch of 40 and 50-year-olds, look how far we've come. I think it's like, well, hang on, like, what are you talking about? Like, you've got problems as well. You haven't solved everything, that kind of thing. And we're this Twitter generation as well. That's mostly our lot in terms of that harshness, that football being driven into social media, the constant need for comment, exactly what we've said. But putting that as a disclaimer, the bit I find interesting is how Roy Keane's come from dressing rooms which predominantly worked, from my understanding of being on it from the outside, and having, as an amateur footballer, been in similar environments in football dressing rooms. They come from that environment of, we will scare you into performing in the way we want you to, is my understanding of it. Like, you're going to play and you're going to perform, and we're going to set these high standards. And if you don't meet those high standards, then we will put more into you to make sure that you do meet them. Which I heard Graham Lasso speaking about a couple of weeks ago in general, on how he was in the Chelsea dressing room because he didn't fit into that mould. But what I find, what I was saying is, whether with Roy Keane, that is such an ingrained belief, I would suggest, in him, because he had senior pros he looks up to and he respects it. At Nottingham Forest do that. He then becomes the senior pro and repeats the cycle. And whether what we're seeing is, we're now seeing actually people we really respect. I respect Roy Keane unbelievably as a player. And let's be honest, these footballers are superheroes. Like, whether they should be is another question, but they are. They're the people as kids we grew up, and I was never into comic books. It was Michael Owen, it was Jermaine Defoe, a who's who of, I'm guessing Dad's going to say overrated centre forwards, but that's your opinion on it. But they're our heroes, and actually to see them standing up, does that repeat a message to us of actually, like, not only am I able to criticise Troy Deeney, Danny Rose, which I think we condemn harshly, actually, the criticism that has been on there. It's been horrendous, in my opinion. But actually, as well as that, I'm not able to talk about my mental health because actually that's a sign of weakness. And we're entering back into that cycle still, even though we think we're beating it. That would be my question, which I asked to both of you for thoughts on that.
I don't know what Gav will think with Mourinho currently being the Tottenham manager, but I guess just sort of seeing the way that when he joins a club, there tends to be a player that he, or on occasion there's been a player that he's particularly singled out. So thinking Mourinho at United, it was Luke Shaw, and a player who sort of particularly gets singled out as not being good enough. And United, Mourinho historically has sort of driven his teams to do well in the first season or the first couple of seasons, and he's driven his teams very hard. And he sort of has quite critical opinions, but gets high performances. But I guess that sort of links in with the Roy Keane style of, you will perform, and if I shout loud enough, you will perform well enough type thing.
Yeah, no, I'd agree, and I can't remember the exact phrase that's used to describe it. Something like aggressive motivation, or it's how that he gets a reaction out of players. And I do think that you can create a cycle of Roy Keane saw the players above him are all like this, and that's what was successful. So then he feeds it down, and they feed it down, and there's an underlying bit of truth there that if you do create a team where they're all very disciplined and focused and don't talk about anything else or care about anything else, then you create a culture which is going to potentially be a winning culture. And anyone who steps out of line is cut out, and they're out of the way. And the culture then that Roy Keane, I guess, would have felt would have been, oh well, we're better off without them. I think that we have moved to a position now where, because of social media, because of the impact that these players have, they have such a bigger profile. I think that you're constantly hearing about them during the week. It's on Sky News, on the websites, it's on Twitter, it's about everything, that they have a bigger role now. And I think that they can't just pretend that they don't have an impact on society anymore. But yeah, we can't pretend that it's just Roy Keane or Jose Mourinho that there will be coaches in football clubs that whenever they hear Danny Rose or a Troy Deeney speak out, and like, would you just stick and play football? Would you just keep quiet and play football? You're a footballer. What are you talking about? And those coaches will still be there. And I guess that's a generational thing that hopefully, if we continue to talk about it and change society, then those will slowly move out of the way. But yeah, not an easy one.
The irony is that clubs don't mind when players speak out about the right thing at the right time. I mean, we see sort of like the Marcus Rashford impact, and I didn't see anybody sort of criticising him for sort of encouraging the government U-turn. And he's been widely praised by that from people both within the sport and outside of the sport. So when it's the right thing, clubs are quite happy for you for the players to speak up. But it needs to sort of fit with where they're at, I guess.
Yeah, and if he'd spoken out on an issue that hadn't got wide-ranging support, if he'd picked a different piece of government legislation or budget decision, and then he turned up and he misses a couple of easy chances against Tottenham, I think that there would have been pundits and newspaper writers who would have been straight into Rashford and how he should be focusing on his football. That's his job. But look at how much he gets paid for. Oh, one of these young people who think that their opinion matters, why he should stick to football, not talk about what's going on in the world. But yeah, no, it's an interesting one because it shows that the impact that they have now is huge. So they could do so much more than they've traditionally done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. Where do we go from here then? Because we've talked a lot about how we see the problems. We've talked a lot about the aspects of the PFA and the football clubs themselves and their responsibility. Where do you and I, yeah, three of us, where do we go as supporters of our football club? Like, what role do we have to play in this? Because we are the consumer here. Like, I hate that word because I hate that that's what football clubs are, but we are consumers. How do we see that change?
I guess from my perspective, it's you can only control the way that you speak and the impact that you have. Perhaps not just trying to necessarily copy the view that you see very negative pundits. Oh, this is how we talk about football. Oh, they were awful. That's the worst performance you've ever seen. He's a disgrace. This is that. I don't think that we necessarily need to speak like that off a game or two. These guys are all extremely impressive athletes. At the end of the day, I'm still going to be very tribal in my support of my team and anti other teams, but I do think that you can amend the way that you think, and hopefully if in society we start to accept discussions like mental health more broadly, then the media will stop reporting in such a way that they think that that's what we want to hear, and they'll get more clicks if we mention his salary whenever we say that he's doing this. So yeah, hopefully over time people adjust, but yeah, you can only change what you do, I guess, versus than trying to change the world, perhaps.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The first thing and the main thing that we can do is think about how we, as fans or as consumers, as you say, Tim, about how we're talking about football and interacting with other people, and perhaps gently challenging other people on their opinions. I do also think that we need to keep praising clubs and keep praising players for the work that they are doing. So when clubs do get involved with things like Time to Change, when players do bother to stand up and say this is difficulty that I've been experiencing, we do need to keep encouraging that, because it then hopefully will sort of keep encouraging other players to feel comfortable. But it does help to sort of show the clubs that we care when they get involved with initiatives and that kind of thing.
Can I, just because I'm interested actually in asking this in this context, did you sit when you're working for Nightline and you're working now, without obviously going into specifics, because I know it's important, did you see reluctance, or were you surprised at, even talking to people who work for the organisations or volunteer for the organisations, the attitudes that were still there in terms of actually talking about things? Because we've talked a lot about how maybe that view in society is talk about it, but not that much. Did you see that, or was that something you think is changing or was different in those environments?
Yeah, I think it is changing, definitely. But I think that we probably have had or are on the verge of what's been described as the sort of mental health revolution, and a greater understanding. And I know that at universities, more students than ever are sort of declaring a mental health condition, which means they're able to access additional support and that kind of thing. So I do think that that's happening, but it's a slow process. There are still archaic views, even differences you might see culturally. In some cultures, mental health is far more acceptable than others, and that is something that that we're still working with as a community. So things are changing, definitely, but it's not. It's probably an evolution more than a revolution.
Okay, interesting. So thanks, guys, for coming and speaking about this stuff. I do think it's important. I do think that, kind of as you both alluded to, I think that there's no problem with supporting Tottenham, supporting Palace, supporting West Ham really passionately and actually really caring about that. I think that, though, what struck me over this time and thinking about it is, in my head, that idea of footballers, as we've talked about, as being people we own and we're able to have that opinion on, and actually, you know, if they talk up, if it fits the agenda, fine. If it doesn't, not kind of thing. And I think what I would like to say in general is that we're not doing this to make anyone feel guilty. As Elliot said, we are as guilty as anything. And I think of last summer, 2 summers ago, I spent the majority of it hammering Eric Dyer, like, in general, and thought nothing of it, because I was just thinking, Eric Dyer's, you know, he's a member of the England squad. I don't like him. I don't want him in the team. Not personally about Eric Dyer, but just as a footballer, I didn't think he was good enough. And I think in my head I distanced that, but I think actually, as if in terms of the humanity of these players, is something we need to remember when we're having those conversations, and actually, you know, not seeing it as our right. And I think I would just come out and say actually that we need to be really strongly praising Danny Rose, Troy Deeney. And when I say praise, I don't just mean giving empty words to it. I mean actually saying, okay, what do you need, kind of thing, if that is the case. And actually, your voice is what we've got in that. So yeah, thank you both.
Thank you very much for having me.
Final serious question. Elliot, can Palace make the Champions League?
I mean, there's dreams of Europa. There's absolutely dreams of Europa, but at the moment they are very much dreams. I think that it's a long way off.
Nice. Gav, what's your thoughts? Palace, what season are they going to have as we finish?
This season, I don't even know it's mathematically possible in terms of Champions League, but yeah, like I think if Wilfred Zaha comes back fully fit, Palace can end up anywhere in the season. I think he's an absolutely sensational footballer, but yeah, I wouldn't. Let's put it this way: I'm able to watch all the football matches going on between now and the end of the year. I don't expect I'll be watching too many Palace games.
There it is. There it is. Right. Thank you, guys. We will see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.